Hello, hello, hello. Hi, gang. Hello, everybody. Yeah, look at that backdrop if you're watching on YouTube. So, the Monday poll question, which will require some explanation as usual. Should President Trump commit to deploying U.S. troops alongside those of European nations to provide security to Ukraine once hostilities have ended? Today's going to be a big day in the framework of what's to come relative to Ukraine and Russia. So much so that I am wearing my Ukraine tie today. It's also a big week at Parks Casino because Thursday night, August 21st, which is this Thursday, Joe Ellis performing her comedic routine at Parks Casino on a comedy night hosted by Philly's own Joe Conklin. Very funny guy of man of a thousand voices. And the national headliner, Ian Lara, who right now has an HBO comedy special called Romantic Comedy, streaming on HBO Max. It's a great deal. You get all these different performances for $25, and your first drink is included. Joe will be a guest on this Thursday's radio program, so that'll be a lot of fun. And you know the backstory about Joe Ellis. Most recently, relative to her comedy career, she got this opportunity on an episode of Kill Tony with Tony Hinchcliffe. It went really well. I watched it, and I suggested to my friends at Parks Casino, hey, Joe would be great. Can you work her into an upcoming comedy night? And they said, of course. So it's this Thursday. Go to parkscasino.com/entertainment, click on comedy, and come out and mingle Thursday night at Parks Casino in the Philly burbs. Should be a fun time. $25. Get your tickets in advance. I'd get them right now and watch Joe and the other performers, and it'll be a fun night. You got to be 21. Gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER. So among the results from the last couple of days in terms of the Smerconish.com daily poll question, I immediately thought of Veterans Stadium in Philadelphia, former home of the Phillies and the Eagles, when I saw the Saturday poll result, because 65,860 voted on Saturday, which is just about the old capacity of Veterans Stadium. It's funny, as a kid, I loved it. As an adult, I realized what a dump it was. All of those multi-purpose stadiums, they were terrible. You know, like, hey, we can do anything in this venue. Yes, but you can't do it well. It was terrible for concerts. I remember seeing the Rolling Stones there. I have a vivid recollection of seeing the Stones there. We were Eagles season ticket holders when I was a kid. We went to a lot of Eagles games. I mean, those were the days when the Eagles were terrible. I still loved going to the games. And it was not unusual for someone to throw an empty fifth of vodka bottle. I saw that happen onto the field. There were always fights. It was always out of control. Anyway, 65,860 voted on the poll question Saturday. If President Trump brokers a peace agreement between Russia and Ukraine that Ukraine finds acceptable, should he be awarded the Nobel Peace Prize? 2/3 said no. 66.51% said no. This was the Hillary Clinton-inspired poll question. She had a lot of caveats. I think the bulk of her quote, which was, if he could bring about the end of this terrible war, if he could end it without putting Ukraine in a position where it had to concede its territory to the aggressor, could really stand up to Putin, something we haven't seen, and maybe this is the opportunity. If President Trump were the architect of that, I'd nominate him for a Nobel Peace Prize, because my goal here is to not allow capitulation to Putin. And that's why in the wording of the question, I said that Ukraine finds acceptable. 2/3 still said no, which I have to say, I think is just exemplary of the anti-Trump bias in many of the poll results. Because I was quite clear, like if he's able to broker something that Zelensky finds acceptable, how about then? Nope, not even then. Not even then. And I heard from a lot of people just within my personal orbit who felt the same way, and I'll discuss that on radio today. last week with Admiral Stavridis, I think his appearance was last Thursday. I asked him, there are these two buckets. There are these two broad buckets in terms of issues that need to be resolved relative to Russia and Ukraine. One are the boundaries, and second are the future security guarantees. Which is more problematic? Which is more cumbersome, difficult to resolve? And he said, without any hesitation, the security guarantees. The security guarantees. Both are on the table today with this meeting that's going to take place, or this series of meetings that are going to take place at the White House, where it's not only President Zelensky, but it's also perhaps as many as 7 other presidents and prime ministers who are accompanying him and will participate in meetings with President Trump. Both are on the table, but it's the security guarantees that seem to be getting much of the attention today. Nobody's talking, where are we? Nobody's talking now about Ukraine and NATO. Nobody's talking about Crimea. Both of those seem to be off the table. No prospect in the short term of Ukraine being a member of NATO, and no prospect of Crimea, which was taken by Putin in 2014, going back into Ukraine hands. The conversation seems to be about how much of that eastern border, the Donetsk region, is going to be held by Russia when all is said and done because of their battlefield gains, and what will the security guarantees look like? And my poll question today really zeroes in on the latter. David Sanger has a good New York Times analysis today, and it includes this, quote, when European and American officials gather at the White House on Monday, they will have more to discuss than just the boundaries. The Europeans have to find a way to bring Mr. Trump on board for concrete security guarantees for Ukraine, which could include a peacekeeping force that would deter Mr. Putin from restarting the war in a few years. In his conversation with European leaders after the Putin summit, Trump suggested for the first time he might be willing to join that effort, though the assumption is he would contribute U.S. intelligence, not troops. In London on Sunday, after a virtual meeting of European countries that called themselves a coalition of the willing, a phrase used in the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, Prime Minister Keir Starmer of Britain's government issued a statement that commended Trump for his commitment to providing security guarantees. That phrasing seemed intended to lock him into the effort. So the question is, what are we, the United States, prepared to do to try and guarantee that whatever negotiation is resolved lasts? From the Wall Street Journal, I've done a lot of reading just to see different perspectives on this. From the Wall Street Journal lead editorial today, quote, for guarantees to have real deterrent effect, they would have to include foreign troops in Ukraine. Kyiv would need the ability to build up its military and arms industry. The U.S. would have to provide intelligence and air power to back up the ground forces. It isn't clear if Mr. Trump or Mr. Putin would agree to any of this, and without the U.S. playing a significant role, European leaders may not be willing to deploy troops. So that's the way the second bucket is coming together. The Europeans are saying, we're willing to put boots on the ground. At no point has Trump said that he'd be willing to do so. It seems instead that the U.S. role would be one of providing intel and air support. But air support really is the equivalent, is it not, of having boots on the ground? One more news source on this issue. It's the Wall Street Journal news reporting. I already shared with you an observation of the editorial page. The UK and France have said they could deploy troops as part of a reassurance force in the western part of Ukraine if a peace agreement was reached to deter future Russian aggression. But they have long sought a limited U.S. role, dubbed a backstop by British officials, to safeguard European forces should they be in danger. Such a role, military analysts say, wouldn't need to involve U.S. boots on the ground, but could include indirect support, such as having U.S. Air Force fighters outside Ukraine at the ready providing European forces with U.S.-made air defense systems, flying drones over Ukraine from outside the country, providing military intelligence, and transporting European troops and equipment on U.S. planes. I have to say, it represents a reversal from what normally is the case, where the U.S. is at the lead and the first to make this kind of a commitment. I kind of like it. I kind of like that what's being talked about is that our troops wouldn't be the first line of this reassurance, but that we would be backstopping what the European nations would be willing to do. And what's also interesting is that all of the countries that we're talking about are NATO countries, but not all of NATO. So it seems as if it's a workaround so that Putin isn't offended that NATO is directly involved, backing up whatever the agreement might be, but some of the component parts of NATO are. I'm testing the boundaries of support for U.S. involvement in all of this with the poll question today. I've noted before, every time there's a hawkish question that I've posed, people err on the side or vote on the side. They don't err on the side, but they vote on the side of whatever's most aggressive. And I have every reason to believe that's what today will bring, but one never knows. I'm asking, should President Trump commit to deploying U.S. troops alongside of European nations to provide security to Ukraine once hostilities have ended? And as I fully explained here, many people are already voting, I'm sure, but I'm explaining here, he's not offered that. And the Europeans seem like they're willing to have less of a military personnel commitment from the United States than they themselves are going to supply. But I'm asking, how far should we go? If they can work out the boundaries, and sadly, I think for Ukraine, there's no way the boundaries are going to be worked out without Putin keeping some of his battlefield spoils. If they can work that out, then should the U.S. be playing a role with our allies in terms of enforcing whatever the peace agreement might look like? That's what I'm asking in today's poll question. And we'll see what everybody says. Lots to discuss on radio today. I was on Friday, monitoring all of the events, as I'm sure many of you were, monitoring all of the events for the Anchorage meeting as they were unfolding, with the knowledge that I'd be talking about it on CNN on Saturday morning. Banged out some preliminary thoughts before I went to bed, wanted to see whether there would be leaks by Saturday morning. And there weren't, interestingly. We've learned more since the Friday discussions ended. And then went on CNN, delivered a commentary, said that I appreciated the effort that President Trump was making, fully critical of his past treatment of Zelensky and the emasculation by he and J.D. Vance, and hoping that we don't see a repeat of that on Monday, now meaning today. But I didn't have a problem with the literal red carpet for Putin, the way in which he greeted Putin, the clap. We'll talk about that with a body language expert today on radio, because I see it all as an effort to try and get this done. And frankly, there hasn't been any similar effort in the last 3.5 years. It doesn't mean that I'm buying into all the tactics and machinations that Trump brings to the table, but I'd like to see something happen here, and hopefully without selling out Ukraine, that can happen. But I think it's unrealistic. It's certainly unrealistic to think that there's going to be peace and it involves Crimea coming back to Ukraine hands, and that Ukraine will become a member of NATO, and that there will be no surrendering of those easternmost areas. Just none of that's practical. And the choice is, Putin is prepared to continue to sacrifice his troops. Do we want to bring it to a close sooner or later? That's what's about to be determined in Washington today. So big day, hoping that it turns out well for Ukraine, and that the concessions are not that horrible and not that devastating, but there are going to be concessions, I'm convinced. Go vote on the U.S. role. That's what I'm asking in today's poll question at Smerconish.com. Like and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube, and set yourself up for notifications. I'll see you all on radio, okay? Thanks, gang.